Hello Geneva, and welcome to Geneva Works. I'm your host Kevin Starr. A compliment that we often hear from residents and visitors is that Geneva is full of historic charm. You're to drive around our downtown or our historic districts, you're bound to see buildings that are more than 100 years old. Today, we are joined by preservation planner Michael Lambert, who will give us an overview of how the city protects these windows to our past.
The Historic Preservation Division is a part of the Community Development Department here at Geneva. We have several purposes here. We are a support to community development in zoning, and we review primarily all of the building permits that are applied for through the Building Division for projects within the Historic District. But we also have other responsibilities, including education about the historic character of the area, about what is in the Historic District and what is not in the Historic District, and about also applying for landmark status or other future historic districts. We also are working to not only educate people about the Historic District, but also to enhance and protect what we already have that's been recognized as historic for more than 40 years. The City of Geneva, as you know, is located strategically on the Fox River, which historically was the gateway to northeastern Illinois. Starting in Ottawa at the south end of the Fox River, the settlers came into northeastern Illinois and settled multiple communities along the Fox River where there was good water power for industrial factories, sawmills, things such as that. So the Fox River served as kind of a spine to the development in northeastern Illinois. The area along Geneva was typical of many of the river towns along the Fox River, where they had all kinds of manufacturing, from actually sawmilling to furniture manufacturing, paper manufacturing, and so it attracted a variety of people from the east who came out to the Midwest looking for a place to settle and expand and grow. When they came from the east, they also brought their architectural styles that were prevalent and popular in the day and brought those to the Midwest. What they did is they transferred those architectural styles, the Greek Revival and later the Gothic Revival, into the materials that were available to them here along the Fox River. So here in Geneva, we find buildings built of timber or wood. We find them built of limestone, locally quarried limestone, and we also find them made of brick. So we have a very interesting architectural palette here in Geneva, as well as a very interesting cultural history. The majority of the landmarks are located within the local historic district, which is bounded on the north by Stevens Street, on the east by the east bank of the Fox River, on the south by the Union Pacific Railroad, and on the west 7th Street. But we also have 5 individual landmarks that are outside of the historic district, and those are located primarily along South Batavia Avenue. There are several benefits to owning properties within the historic district. The first and foremost is more of the honorary distinction of being able to say that you are part of Geneva's history and part of its cultural heritage. But there are 2 other very significant benefits for commercial properties. There's a tax credit available through the Internal Revenue Service, and there's also a state tax assessment freeze that's available through the state of Illinois. Both of these have varying financial incentives based on the amount of money that is put towards the restoration or the adaptive use of a historic structure within the historic district or as an individual landmark. For properties within the historic district, the building permit process starts the same as any other building permit within the City of Geneva. An application is filed with the Building Division, and then if it's within the historic district, a second form is filled out for review by the Historic Preservation Commission. At that point, it would be turned over to me, and I would gauge it against the standards that are established for the Preservation Commission. We have 2 sets of standards that we look at. We have the national standards that are developed by the Secretary of the Interior, and we also have our own local building permit review table, which helps us identify whether the work is minor work or major work. It also depends upon whether the building is classified as a non-contributing, a contributing, a potentially significant, or a significant building within the historic district. Based on all of that criteria, The process would be that your project would either be reviewed administratively by myself and would be turned around in about anywhere from a week to 10 days, or if it is a more complicated project, it would go in front of the entire Historic Preservation Commission. The Historic Preservation Commission meets on the third Tuesday of each month and reviews the major projects within the historic district. Once they have reviewed the project, it would be a matter of coming back to my desk to be approved, and then it would be transferred over to the building division for them to issue the final permit. That entire process, if it goes to the Historic Preservation Commission, takes anywhere from about 4 to 6 weeks, depending on when the application is turned into the Historic Preservation Commission for review. The draft Historic Preservation Ordinance has been in the works for about 18 months. We have looked at the 1995 ordinance, which is now 20 years old, and have compared that to other ordinances that were written in other communities and how they've been working there, comparing it to how it works in Geneva, looking at processes that have changed in Geneva in the ensuing 20 years since the last ordinance was adopted. And we've been also then comparing it to our current practice here in Geneva. So we are now in the final draft of the ordinance. It has been before the Historic Preservation Commission for 4 different meetings at this point for public input and public comment. And our goal is that on May 19th it will go before the Historic Preservation Commission for a final review, and then to the Committee of the Whole on May 26th. The two documents are very different. The ordinance is actually our rules and regulations, how we actually review a proposed project within the historic district or at a landmark property. The preservation plan that was written in 2010 actually lays out the goals for the continued preservation and enhancement of the historic district and future landmark properties. So the ordinance is our nuts and bolts rules that we go day to day with, and the plan is a long-term vision of what we hope preservation will accomplish in Geneva. With 7 members on the Historic Preservation Commission, it allows 7 different viewpoints to be brought to a case that might be a little bit more complicated. So using their different expertise and different opinions, we can work with a client or an applicant to help determine what the appropriate compromise, or give them some direction in some cases. Sometimes people will come before the Historic Preservation Commission without a clear idea of what their project should consist of. And through these different perspectives and the conversation, and it truly is a conversation at the Historic Preservation Commission level, we can help develop a project that meets not only the objectives of the homeowner or the property owner, but also the objectives of the Commission as defined by the United States Secretary of Interior Standards for Rehabilitation. The community of Geneva is educated about historic preservation through a lot of different venues. Primarily, it's one-on-one consultation with applicants who are interested in either doing a project within the district or who may be interested in purchasing a property within the district. So a lot of times it's that one-on-one communication over a simple table, talking with an applicant about what their project consists of. They may not understand the architectural style or the significant features of their particular building, and so we work with them one-on-one in that regard. And then when it comes to the elements of design, they often are working with their own architect or design professional, and they will, again, meet one-on-one, and we'll talk about whether that's an appropriate approach to the building that they're looking at, or if there's other things they should be considering. It can be as broad as whether they are putting on a large addition and want to make sure the massing is appropriate for the historic style, down to something as simple as what the divisions in a window should be for their particular property. So it's a wide variety of education on that basis. Also, we find that the general public has become more and more educated when they come to our meetings and hear the discussion that occurs between the commissioners and applicants. That in itself can be very informative. We also try to do various events throughout the year as time allows. We have done different events during Preservation Month, which include, we've done a photographic contest which help people understand the materials that are found in Geneva. We have done self-guided walking tours which have been very popular, that actually are tied to your smartphone, and that gives more information about the building than just a few lines of information. And then the final thing that we do is we educate our commission as well. We expect them to be continually being brought into the most current decisions about historic preservation. So for instance, we are going to be having commissioner training later on this year that will be a day-long training for them to understand their duties, their responsibilities, as well as understanding the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. After we conclude the work on the Historic Preservation Ordinance, the next significant project will be an update of the 1998 Architectural Survey. That survey was completed by outside consultants and photographed every building on every property within the historic district. The criteria in 1998 was to identify buildings that were 50 years old or older at that time. 50 years is a magical number in historic preservation because we consider something that's at least 50 years old as becoming potentially historic. Not everything 50 years old is historic, but it has the potential of being historic. So since 1998, there are a lot of buildings that have come into that 50-year range that were not fully documented in 1998. So we hope to pick up those buildings that were built between 1948 and 1965 within the historic district and make a determination of whether or not they've become historic in their own right, and then add that to the listing of potentially significant and significant properties as well as contributing properties. We suspect that's going to take several months to complete, and then that will give us a clear picture of what the historic district looks like in 2015. We also are going to be reporting that information back to the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency. They have made some requests that we do some updating of our documents that are very old. The first historic district was put in place in 1979, and the second one was put in place in 1983. Since that time, the state and the National Register processes have wanted to have a little bit more information about historic districts, so the updated survey will allow us to provide that information to them as well. The other project that we're working on internally that's a pretty significant project is looking back at the evolution and the change of the historic district since it was first established in 1979. Our hope is to evaluate all of the permits that have been issued over time, and looking back through some of the documents in the last 20 to 30 years, and help start creating a map that shows where buildings have been preserved, where buildings have been demolished or lost, where buildings have been moved, where new construction has occurred. So again, trying to continually update our information so that we have the best information available to staff and to the public about what the character of the historic district is. There is a lot of information out there about historic preservation. At the national level, of course, you can look at to the National Register of Historic Places or the National Trust for Historic Preservation. At the state level, we have both the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency and Landmarks Illinois, which is an advocacy group for the state. Those are great resources to understand preservation in general and the direction that preservation is headed on a more global perspective. Locally, however, you can contact me with questions. I'm here at the City of Geneva Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and I'm glad to answer any questions, whether they're very specific or whether they're general about historic preservation. But for other information, such as things as what is Geneva's window policy, what is our siding policy, when are meetings held, etc., that can all be found on the city website at www.geneva.il.us, and go to the City Departments tab, and then tab down to Community Development, and under that you'll find Historic Preservation. And there we have a lot of resources listed on our page that are very user-friendly and typically answer most of the questions that any property owners have here in Geneva.
That's all the time we have for Geneva Works today. I'd like to thank Michael Lambert for his time and insight into historic preservation. We also thank you for watching. We hope you tune in again next month to see how Geneva is working for you.